They thought inheriting a remote mountain cabin was their only hope to survive the winter. But what Margaret and Thomas discovered beneath the frozen floorboards wasn't just shelter. It was $245 million worth of secrets that powerful people had killed to keep buried for over 70 years. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in late October, sliding through the mail slot of their cramped one-bedroom apartment like a whisper from another world. Margaret Monroe picked it up with hands that had once held chalk and textbooks with grace, but now bore the purple bruises of scrubbing floors and washing dishes at the diner 3 blocks away. She was 67 years old, and every one of those years showed in the lines around her eyes, the silver threading through her brown hair, the way her shoulders curved forward like she'd been carrying something heavy for too long. Because she had been. The return address read, Holloway and Associates, Attorneys at Law, Pinewood, Wyoming. She didn't know anyone in Wyoming. She turned the envelope over twice, suspicion creeping up her spine. Bills she recognized. Collection notices she knew by heart. But legal correspondence? That was new territory, and in her experience, new territory was rarely good. "Thomas," she called toward the tiny bedroom where her husband rested. "Yeah?" His voice carried the rasp of a man who'd spent 43 years breathing factory air, metal dust settling in his lungs like snow that never melted. Thomas Monroe was 71, though some days he felt twice that. His heart had started giving him trouble 2 years back, right around the time the plant closed and his pension evaporated in some bankruptcy filing he never fully understood. He emerged wearing his threadbare robe, the blue one Margaret had given him for Christmas back in 1998. It still fit, mostly because he'd lost so much weight. Medical bills had a way of shrinking both bank accounts and belt sizes. "What is it?" he asked, squinting without his glasses. "Legal letter," Margaret said, sitting down at their small kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg Thomas kept meaning to fix. "From Wyoming." Thomas lowered himself into the chair across from her, moving carefully. Quick movements sometimes triggered the arrhythmia that sent his pulse racing and his vision swimming. "Wyoming? We don't know anybody in Wyoming." Margaret slid her finger under the envelope flap and pulled out a single sheet of expensive paper, the kind with weight to it. Her eyes scanned the typed words once, then again, then a third time, because surely she was reading it wrong. "Maggie," Thomas used the nickname he'd called her since they were both 22, young and foolish, and so in love they'd gotten married on $57 and a promise. "What's it say?" She looked up at him, her brown eyes wide. "It's about Uncle Bernard." Thomas frowned. "Your Uncle Bernard? The one you haven't seen since I was 37, Margaret finished. Exactly 30 years. He came to my father's funeral, stayed for 10 minutes, and left before the reception. I barely knew him then. Haven't heard from him since." "What about him?" Margaret's voice came out thin, uncertain. "He died 3 weeks ago, 94 years old." She paused, her fingers trembling slightly on the paper. "And he left me something." The letter was brief, professional, almost cold in its efficiency. It informed Margaret that Bernard Joseph Hartley, her mother's brother, had passed away on September 28th. Having no children or living siblings, he had named Margaret as his sole beneficiary. The inheritance consisted of a property located in the Teton mountain range, approximately 15 miles northwest of Pinewood, Wyoming. The letter requested her presence at the law office to finalize the transfer of deed and discuss the, quote, unique circumstances of the property. Thomas leaned back in his chair, one hand absently rubbing his chest. "A cabin. He left you a cabin." "Apparently." Margaret read the letter again, searching for some detail she'd missed, some explanation for why a man she barely knew would leave her anything at all. I don't understand. Why me? We were never close. I can count on one hand the number of times I saw him in my entire life. Maybe you were the only family left. Maybe. But something about it didn't sit right. Uncle Bernard had been a strange man, from what little she remembered. Quiet, intense. The kind of person who seemed to be listening to conversations no one else could hear. At her father's funeral, he'd stood apart from everyone, watching, waiting. She remembered thinking he looked like a man guarding something, though she'd never known what. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She lay beside Thomas in their creaky bed, listening to his uneven breathing, and thought about numbers. Specifically, the numbers in their checkbook that kept getting smaller no matter how many shifts she picked up at the diner. Their rent was $850 a month, due in 9 days. Thomas's heart medication cost $237 every 3 weeks. They had $412 in their account and $17 in cash tucked in the sugar tin above the refrigerator. A cabin. Maybe they could sell it. Maybe it was worth something. Maybe, for the first time in 2 years, they could breathe without calculating the cost of each breath. She must have dozed off eventually, because when she opened her eyes, grey dawn light filtered through their thin curtains. Thomas was already up, had been for hours probably. Insomnia and heart trouble made reluctant companions. She found him at the kitchen table, the letter spread in front of him, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "I called them," he said without looking up. "The law office, left a message. They open at 8. Margaret poured herself coffee from the pot he'd made, her 3rd cup already. "Thomas, we don't even know if we can afford the trip to Wyoming." "Gas money," he said. 300 miles, maybe less. Our truck gets 22 miles per gallon. Figure 15 gallons of gas, call it $45. We can do that." She sat down across from him and covered his weathered hand with hers. 45 years of marriage had taught her to read the set of his jaw, the way his eyes fixed on something with that particular intensity. He'd already decided. They were going. The phone rang at 8:17. Margaret answered, her heart pounding harder than it should for something as simple as a phone call. "Mrs. Monroe?" The voice on the other end was male, older, measured. "This is Gerald Holloway. I represent your Uncle Bernard's estate." "Yes, I received your letter." "I'm glad you called. There are some matters we need to discuss in person. The property your uncle left you is, well, it's rather unique. When might you be able to come to Pinewood?" Margaret glanced at Thomas, who nodded. "We could leave today. Be there tomorrow." There was a pause. "Mrs. Monroe, I should warn you. Winter comes early to the Tetons. We're expecting significant snow within the next week. If you're going to view the property, sooner is better than later. Once the snow hits, that cabin becomes inaccessible until spring thaw." Inaccessible? The road isn't maintained past the 3-mile marker. Your uncle preferred his isolation. He had supplies dropped by helicopter twice a year. The cabin itself is solid, built to last, but getting to it requires a 4-wheel drive and some nerve. If you get snowed in up there, you'll be there for the duration. Margaret's grip tightened on the phone. "Mr. Holloway, what exactly did my uncle do up there?" Another pause, longer this time. "That, Mrs. Monroe, is something you'll need to see for yourself. I have a key, some documents, and a map. But I should tell you, your uncle was very specific in his instructions. He wanted you to have the property, not sell it, not abandon it. Have it, live in it if you chose. Protect it." "Protect it from what?" "I don't know," Holloway said, and for the first time his professional tone cracked slightly. "Your uncle was a very private man. I handled his legal affairs for 23 years, and I couldn't tell you what he was protecting. Only that he believed it was important enough to spend his entire life guarding." They left the next morning, everything they owned packed into 3 duffel bags in the bed of Thomas's 1997 Ford pickup. The truck was old, rust-eating at the wheel wells, but the engine was solid. Thomas had always been good with engines, good with his hands. good at making broken things work a little longer. The drive from Billings, Montana to Pinewood, Wyoming should have taken about 4 hours. But Thomas drove carefully, especially on the mountain roads, and Margaret spent the time watching the landscape transform. The rolling plains gave way to foothills, then to mountains that rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks already dusted with snow. The radio crackled with weather reports. Winter storm warning in effect. 8 to 12 inches expected in lower elevations, up to 2 feet in the mountains. Travelers advised to postpone trips. "We should turn back," Margaret said, though she didn't mean it, couldn't afford to mean it. Thomas's hands tightened on the wheel. "We're almost there." Pinewood wasn't much of a town. Population 312 according to the weathered sign at the town limits. One main street with a gas station, a general store, a diner that looked like it had been serving the same coffee since the Eisenhower administration, and a small brick building with a hand-painted sign reading Holloway and Associates. Gerald Holloway was exactly what Margaret had pictured. Mid-60s, silver hair combed with military precision, suit that had been expensive 20 years ago and was now simply well-maintained. His office smelled like old books and wood polish. Behind his desk hung a photograph of the Teton Range in summer, all granite and glory. "Mrs. Monroe, Mr. Monroe." Holloway shook their hands with a grip that was firm but not aggressive. "Thank you for coming so quickly. I wasn't sure you would." "The letter was pretty compelling," Margaret said, taking the chair he offered. The leather was cracked but comfortable. Holloway opened a file folder, pulled out several documents. "I'll try to be brief. Your uncle purchased the property in 1976, 43 acres, mostly forested, with a cabin he built himself over the course of 2 years. He lived there year-round until his death. The property taxes are current, paid through the end of next year. After that, they'll be your responsibility." "How much?" Thomas asked. $700 annually. Margaret felt something loosen in her chest. $700. They could manage that, maybe. "The cabin itself is quite substantial," Holloway continued. 2 stories, stone chimney, well water, solar panels your uncle had installed in 2008. There's a generator as backup. He had supplies helicoptered in twice a year, mostly staples and fuel. The structure is sound. Bernard was nothing if not meticulous. "You said it was unique," Margaret prompted. Holloway met her eyes. "The cabin is one of the most secure structures I've ever seen that wasn't a bank vault. Reinforced doors, windows that could withstand significant impact, locks that would make a prison warden jealous. Your uncle didn't just build a home, Mrs. Monroe, he built a fortress." "Why?" Thomas asked. "I don't know. He never said." Holloway pulled out a brass key, heavy and old-fashioned, along with a hand-drawn map. "But he was very clear that you should have it. He left explicit instructions. If he died, the property went to you, no one else. No auction, no alternative heirs. You." Margaret took the key. It was cold in her palm, solid, real. "Did he say why me?" "He said you were the only one he could trust." Holloway's expression softened slightly. "He said you understood the value of preservation, of protecting things that mattered." She thought about that. She'd been a history teacher for 34 years before the school district consolidated and her position was eliminated. She'd taught middle schoolers about ancient Rome and the American Revolution, about how civilizations rose and fell, how easily history could be lost if no one bothered to remember it. But she couldn't imagine what that had to do with a cabin in the mountains. Holloway spread the map across his desk. It showed a winding road marked in red ink, distances noted in Bernard's careful handwriting. "The main road ends here, at the 3-mile marker. From there, it's an old mining road, barely maintained. You'll need 4-wheel drive. The cabin is here." He pointed to a small X at the end of the road. "Coordinates are marked. Cell phone service is non-existent. The nearest neighbor is 8 miles away, and they're only there in summer." "We're going today?" Margaret asked. "That's up to you. But Mrs. Munro, if you go up there now and the snow hits as hard as they're predicting, you won't be coming down until March, maybe April. Are you prepared for that?" Margaret looked at Thomas. His jaw was set in that familiar way, the stubborn angle that meant he'd already made up his mind. They both knew what waited for them back in Billings. An empty apartment, bills they couldn't pay, a winter of scraping by and hoping Thomas's heart held out until they could afford his next prescription refill. "We're prepared," she said. Holloway nodded slowly. "Then I'll give you some advice Bernard gave me once. He said the mountain takes care of those who respect it, but it doesn't forgive carelessness. Whatever you do up there, do it carefully." They stopped at the general store and spent $193 on supplies. Canned goods, batteries, matches, rope, a first aid kit that was more comprehensive than the one they had. The woman at the register, somewhere in her 50s, with wind-weathered skin and knowing eyes, rang up their purchases without comment until she saw Holloway's business card tucked in Margaret's coat pocket. "You the ones taking Bernard's place?" she asked. "You knew him," Margaret replied. "Everybody knew of him. Nobody really knew him, if you catch my meaning. He'd come down twice a year, stock up, head back up. Polite enough, but distant, like he was always listening for something the rest of us couldn't hear." She bagged their groceries in brown paper. "He was good people, though. Helped my son once when his truck broke down on that mountain road. Sat with him until help came, even though it meant he missed his own supply drop. Yeah, Bernard was good people." Back in the truck, Thomas studied the map while Margaret drove. The road climbed steadily, pine trees pressing close on either side. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to dirt packed hard by decades of neglect. At the 3-mile marker, an old wooden sign read "Private Road, no trespassing." "Here we go," Thomas said. Margaret shifted into 4-wheel drive and turned onto what could barely be called a road. It was more like a suggestion, 2 ruts worn into the mountainside, weeds growing in the middle. The truck bounced and lurched, branches scraped the sides. She drove slowly, carefully, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "How far?" she asked. Thomas checked the map. 12 more miles, give or take. It took them 2 hours to cover those 12 miles. The road wound up the mountain, switchback after switchback, climbing towards something Margaret couldn't yet see. The sky had turned grey, heavy with the promise of snow. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees since they left Pinewood. Then, through a break in the trees, she saw it. The cabin sat in a clearing, nestled against the base of a granite cliff. It wasn't small. 2 stories of solid log construction, massive timbers that must have weighed hundreds of pounds each. A stone chimney rose from the center, smoke-stained but intact. The roof was metal, designed to shed snow. Shutters covered the windows, thick wood reinforced with iron straps. But what struck Margaret most was the sense of permanence. This wasn't some weekend retreat or hunting lodge. This was a structure built to endure, to withstand whatever the mountain threw at it. It looked less like a home and more like a medieval keep, something out of time. Thomas let out a low whistle. He wasn't kidding about the fortress part. They parked in front of the cabin. The first snowflakes had started to fall, fat and lazy, drifting down like ash. Margaret climbed out, her boots sinking into earth that felt frozen beneath the surface. The silence was absolute. No cars, no planes, no distant hum of civilization, just wind through the pines and the soft patter of snow beginning to accumulate. The front door was solid oak, 4 inches thick, fitted with 3 separate deadbolts. Margaret fumbled with the brass key, her fingers clumsy with cold and nerves. The lock turned with a heavy click that echoed across the clearing. The door swung inward on hinges that didn't creak. Inside smelled like old wood and cold air, but not decay, not abandonment. Everything was covered with white sheets, ghostly shapes in the dimness. Thomas found a light switch, flicked it. Nothing happened. "Generator's probably off," he said. "I'll find it." Margaret moved deeper into the cabin, pulling back sheets to reveal furniture that was simple but well made. A sofa, a kitchen table with 4 chairs, bookshelves lining one wall. In the kitchen, she found the pantry stocked with canned goods, dried beans, rice, flour, enough food for months, maybe years. Why would he need so much food? Thomas returned, brushing snow from his shoulders. Generator's in a shed out back. Runs on propane. Tanks are full. I'll get it started. 15 minutes later, lights flickered on throughout the cabin. Margaret explored methodically, like she was taking inventory. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms, one clearly Bernard's. The bed was made with military precision, blanket tucked with hospital corners. A small dresser held clothing, folded and organized by type. No photographs, no personal touches, just functionality. In the other bedroom, she found more supplies. Batteries, candles, medical equipment still in packaging. A ham radio on a desk beneath the window. Everything labeled, organized, prepared. Back downstairs, she found Thomas examining the stone fireplace in what must have been Bernard's study. He ran his hand along the mantel. "This whole place is like a bunker. Look at these windows." Margaret moved closer. The glass was thick, triple-paned. The frames were steel, not wood. He was protecting something. Or protecting himself from something. They worked together to start a fire, using wood from the stack beside the hearth. As the flames caught and warmth began to spread through the room, Margaret noticed details she'd missed before. The way the floorboards were newer in some sections, as if they'd been replaced. The faint outline of something on the walls, like pictures had hung there once and been removed. The peculiar echo when she walked across certain parts of the floor. "Thomas," she said slowly, "does this room sound strange to you?" He paused, listening. Then he walked across the floor, his boots heavy. In some places the sound was solid, dull. In others it resonated, almost hollow. "Something's under here," he said. They moved the rug back from the center of the room, rolled it to the side. Beneath was a pattern in the floorboards Margaret hadn't noticed before. A square about 3 feet on each side, outlined by slightly different wood, and at the corner a heavy iron ring flush with the floor. Margaret's heart started to pound. She knelt down, ran her fingers along the seam. "Thomas, help me with this." Together they pulled on the iron ring. The trapdoor was heavy, solid wood reinforced with metal. It lifted slowly, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. Cold air wafted up, carrying a scent that was mineral and old, like a cave. Thomas found his flashlight, shone it down into the darkness. The beam revealed stairs carved from rock, precise and deliberate. At the bottom, perhaps 20 feet down, the light reflected off something metal. A door. And not just any door. This one was steel, modern, with 3 separate locks arranged in a triangular pattern. "Maggie," Thomas breathed, "what the hell was your uncle hiding down there?" Before she could answer, they heard it, faint but unmistakable. A low, steady hum, like machinery running, like something powered and active, waiting in the dark beneath their feet. Margaret looked at Thomas, then back down into the darkness. Snowflakes were falling harder now outside the windows, building up on the sills, sealing them in. Whatever was down there had been running for who knew how long. Weeks, months, maybe years. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she heard Holloway's words. "He built a fortress. He wanted you to have it, protect it." Protect what? The humming continued, patient and eternal, like a heartbeat beneath the mountain. Morning came cold and pale through the cabin windows. Margaret woke on the sofa, stiff and disoriented. A blanket she didn't remember pulling over herself, tucked around her shoulders. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, the trapdoor visible beyond him in the study, still open like a mouth waiting to swallow them whole. "You didn't sleep," she said. "Couldn't." He held a cup of coffee, steam curling up into the dim light. Kept thinking about that sound. "It's still going, Maggie, all night long. Whatever's down there, it's been running for God knows how long." Margaret joined him, poured herself coffee from the pot he'd made. Outside, the world had transformed. Snow covered everything, at least 6 inches already, and more falling. The truck was a white mound in the clearing. The trees bowed under the weight. They weren't leaving. Not today. Maybe not for months. "We need to find the keys," she said. They'd searched the previous evening until exhaustion won, combing through drawers and cabinets, checking every pocket of Bernard's clothing, examining every book on the shelves for hidden compartments. Nothing. The 3 locks on the steel door glinted in their flashlight beams, mocking them. Thomas set down his coffee. "If you were hiding keys to something that important, where would you put them?" "Somewhere safe. Somewhere only the right person would think to look." "Or somewhere in plain sight," Thomas said slowly. He was military intelligence, right? They think different. What did that woman at the store say? He was always listening for something we couldn't hear. Margaret thought about that. About Bernard at her father's funeral, standing apart, watching. About the cabin built like a fortress. About the meticulous organization of supplies, the careful labeling, the systematic preparation. Everything Bernard did had purpose. Nothing was random. "His bedroom," she said suddenly. "We barely looked there." Upstairs, Bernard's room felt different in daylight. Sparse, but not empty. Margaret opened the dresser drawers again, more carefully this time. Underneath the neatly folded undershirts, her fingers found something. A false bottom. She pried it up gently. Inside was a small wooden box, maybe 6 inches square. Her hands trembled as she lifted it out. The wood was dark, old, carved with symbols she didn't recognize. No lock, just a simple latch. "Thomas," she called. He appeared in the doorway as she opened the box. Inside, resting on red velvet that had faded to pink, were 3 keys. They were different sizes, different styles. One was modern, made of steel, with a complex pattern of cuts. One was older, brass, ornate. The third was somewhere in between, iron with a simple but precise design. Beneath the keys was an envelope, yellowed with age but sealed. Her name written across it in Bernard's careful handwriting. Margaret. Her throat tightened. She picked up the envelope with fingers that felt numb. Thomas sat beside her on the edge of the bed as she broke the seal. The letter inside was dated 3 weeks before Bernard's death. "Dear Margaret, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you found the door. I'm sorry to put this burden on you. Sorry I couldn't explain in person. But some things can't be said face to face. Some truths need distance and time to be understood. What lies beneath the cabin is both a blessing and a burden. I've spent 47 years of my life protecting it, and now that responsibility falls to you. I chose you not because you're family, though you are. I chose you because I watched you teach. I watched you make children care about history, about preservation, about the things that matter beyond ourselves. I saw someone who understood that some things are worth protecting, even when no one else knows they exist. The chamber below holds items worth approximately $245 million, but their true value cannot be measured in money. These are pieces of history that were stolen, lost, nearly destroyed. I spent my life recovering them from war criminals, black market dealers, corrupt officials who would have melted them down or locked them away in private vaults where no one would ever see them again. I couldn't return many of them. The countries they came from no longer existed. The museums were bombed. The families were dead. So I kept them safe. I built this place to protect them until the world was ready to receive them properly. Now that's your choice to make. In the chamber, you'll find my records. Every item documented, every provenance traced, every rightful owner identified when possible. I've left instructions for repatriation, for preservation, for what should be done with each piece. But Margaret, you must understand. There are people who know or suspect what I've been hiding. People who would kill to possess these items. People who have already killed. I've kept them at bay for decades through careful planning and isolation. But I'm old now, and my time is running out. Trust no one until you understand what you're protecting. The lawyer, Holloway, is honest but doesn't know the full truth. The town knows I was secretive, but nothing more. Keep it that way until you're ready. 3 locks, 3 keys. Each one represents a different level of security, a different choice. Once you open that door, there's no going back. You'll become what I was, a guardian of things the world forgot but still needs. I'm sorry, Margaret. I'm sorry I couldn't find another way. But of all the people in this world, you're the only one I could trust with this. You taught children to value what came before. Now I'm asking you to protect it. The chamber is climate-controlled, powered by geothermal energy. It will run indefinitely. Everything you need to know is in my journals down there. Everything you need to decide what comes next. I hope you can forgive me for this. I hope you'll understand why I did what I did. And I hope when the time comes, you'll do what I couldn't. Give these treasures back to the world. Your uncle, Bernard. Margaret's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the letter. Thomas took it from her, read it through twice. The silence between them stretched like a wire pulled taut. $245 million, Thomas finally said, his voice barely a whisper. It's not about the money, Margaret replied. He said some of these things can't be measured that way. No, but Maggie, think about what this means. If someone knows, if people have killed, then we need to see what's down there. We need to understand what we're dealing with. Thomas looked at her, really looked at her, and in his eyes she saw fear and something else. Pride, maybe, or recognition. After 45 years, he knew when her mind was made up. They descended the stone steps together, Margaret in front with the flashlight, Thomas behind with the keys. The steps were narrow, carved directly from the mountain rock. Moisture seeped through in places, making the stones slick. The temperature dropped with each step, their breath misting in the beam of light. At the bottom, the steel door loomed before them. It was modern, industrial, the kind of door you'd find in a bank vault. 3 locks arranged in a triangle, 1 at the top, 2 at the bottom corners. Beside the door, a small panel with a single red light glowing steadily. Margaret held up the keys, trying to decide which went where. The modern steel key seemed obvious for the top lock. She slid it in, turned it. The mechanism engaged with a heavy clunk. The red light blinked once. The brass key fit the bottom left lock. Another clunk. The light blinked twice. The iron key for the bottom right. The final tumbler fell into place. The red light turned green, and with a sound like a sigh, the door unsealed. Hydraulics hissed. The steel panel, easily 6 inches thick, swung slowly inward. Cold air rushed out, but it wasn't stale. It was fresh, filtered, controlled. Lights flickered on automatically, revealing what lay beyond. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a room. It was a cavern, massive and impossible, carved from the living rock of the mountain. The ceiling arched 30 feet above them, supported by natural stone columns. The walls had been smoothed and reinforced, and everywhere, there were items. They stood in the entrance, unable to move, unable to process what they were seeing. Row after row of shelving, glass cases, climate-controlled containers. The space stretched back into the mountain, extending far beyond what should have been possible. How? Thomas whispered. How did he build all this? Margaret stepped inside, her boots echoing on the smooth stone floor. She moved toward the nearest glass case. Inside, resting on black velvet, was a piece of pottery. Greek, she thought, from the style. The red and black figures depicted warriors in battle. A small brass plaque beside it read, Amphora, 5th century BC, Athens. Recovered 1983 from private collector in Geneva. Original theft, Nazi looting, World War II, rightful owner, unknown, family records destroyed. She moved to the next case. A sculpture, marble, clearly Roman. The plaque, bust of Augustus Caesar, 1st century ad. Recovered 1979 from black market dealer in Cairo. Original theft, Italian museum bombing, 1943. "Maggie?" Thomas called from deeper in the chamber. His voice sounded strange, hollow. "You need to see this." She found him standing before a larger case, maybe 10 feet long. Inside were paintings, not one or two, dozens of them, stacked carefully with archival paper between each canvas. The top one visible showed a landscape, vibrant colors that seemed to glow even through the glass. The plaque read, "Various works, 18th and 19th century, recovered 1991 from estate sale, original owners, Jewish families, Vienna and Prague. Stolen, Nazi confiscation, 1938 to 1942. Margaret felt tears burning her eyes. These weren't just objects, these were lives, families, histories stolen and scattered, pieces of human existence that should have been destroyed but somehow survived. They moved through the chamber like people in a dream. Everywhere they looked, there was something impossible, something precious, something that shouldn't exist but did. Egyptian artifacts with hieroglyphs still crisp and clear, illuminated manuscripts from medieval monasteries, jewelry that must have adorned royalty, sculpture, pottery, textiles, metalwork, and weapons too, swords, shields, armor that gleamed under the lights. Each item had a plaque. Each plaque told a story of theft, recovery, displacement. Bernard's careful handwriting documenting where each piece came from, how he'd acquired it, who it truly belonged to. In the center of the chamber, they found Bernard's workspace, a large wooden desk, scarred but solid, file cabinets lining the walls behind it, books stacked everywhere, reference materials in a dozen languages, and journals, leather-bound journals filling an entire shelf, dated from 1976 to the present. Margaret picked up the most recent one, opened it to the last entry. Bernard's handwriting, shakier now but still precise, dated just days before his death, September 24th. "My hands are failing, my vision fades, but the work is complete. 34 years of searching, recovering, preserving, 173 major pieces, thousands of smaller items, everyone documented, everyone waiting for its chance to go home. I've chosen Margaret because she understands. She taught history not as dates and names but as human stories. She knows these objects matter not because they're valuable but because they're memory. They're proof that beauty survives even the worst of human cruelty. I only hope she has the strength to finish what I started. To trust when trust seems impossible. To protect when protection seems futile. To believe that sometimes one person can make a difference. The coordinates for the chamber are in the master file. The contacts for repatriation are in the blue folder. The legal documentation is in the safe behind the Voltaire. I've done everything I can to make this easier for her. But it won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. If you're reading this, Margaret, then I'm gone, and you're standing where I stood for nearly half a century, alone in the dark, surrounded by other people's treasures, wondering what the hell to do next. Here's what you do. You read my notes, you understand the scope, and then you decide. Keep them hidden and safe, or give them back to the world. There's no wrong answer. Only the answer you can live with. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this in person. Sorry I couldn't prepare you better. But you were always stronger than you knew. You'll figure it out. Margaret set the journal down carefully, her vision blurred with tears. Thomas stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. He carried all this alone, she said, for 47 years, never telling anyone, never asking for help. But he didn't stay silent, Thomas replied. He left it to you. He trusted you to decide what comes next. They spent the next 3 hours exploring the chamber systematically. Thomas found the climate control system, geothermal powered as Bernard had said, drawing heat from deep in the earth. The technology was impressive, installed over decades, maintained meticulously. Margaret found the filing system color-coded and cross-referenced. Blue folders for items with known owners or descendants, red folders for items with cultural significance but uncertain provenance. Green folders for items that could safely be returned to museums or governments. Yellow folders for items still too dangerous to reveal, objects that would trigger international incidents or private wars if their existence became known. In the safe behind a first edition of Voltaire's Candide, they found the master documentation. Photographs of every item, professionally taken. Provenance reports, some running to hundreds of pages. Legal documents, notarized statements, chain of custody records. Bernard had prepared everything, thought of everything. And at the bottom of the safe, a list of names. Historians, museum curators, ethical lawyers, cultural preservation specialists. People Bernard had identified as trustworthy, people who might help when the time came. Margaret photographed everything with an old digital camera she found in the desk. She didn't trust that this was real, that it would still be here tomorrow. She needed proof. What happens next will test everything Margaret and Thomas believe about trust, legacy, and survival. The storm outside is nothing compared to the one about to arrive. Stay with us to see how an elderly couple becomes the guardian of history itself. If you're captivated by this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. By late afternoon, they emerged from the chamber, muscles aching, minds reeling. Margaret sealed the door, heard the locks engage, watched the panel light turn red again. Upstairs, the cabin felt different now. Smaller somehow. Less like a refuge and more like what it really was. A checkpoint. The outer layer of Bernard's fortress. Thomas made coffee while Margaret spread Bernard's journals across the kitchen table. She started with the first one, dated March 1976. Today, I bought the land. 43 acres of nothing, they said. Too remote to be useful, too rocky to farm. Perfect. The real estate agent kept asking what I planned to do out here. Told him I wanted peace and quiet. Truth is, I need somewhere no one will look. Somewhere I can build something that will last. The war never ended for me. Not really. I spent 1943 to 1945 watching the Nazis steal everything beautiful Europe had created over 2,000 years. Watched them load trucks with paintings and sculpture and manuscripts, shipping it all back to Germany for the Führer's planned museum. Or for their own private collections. Or just to destroy it because beauty offended their ideology of power. I was there when we liberated concentration camps, saw the piles of jewelry, gold teeth, wedding rings, saw the records of looting, the systematic theft of entire cultures. And I swore then that I'd spend the rest of my life trying to return what was stolen. But the army had other plans. They wanted me in intelligence, Cold War work. So I did both. Day job tracking Soviet spies. Night job tracking stolen art. Most people think the looted art was returned after the war. They're wrong. Most of it disappeared into private collections, black market sales, storage warehouses that burned conveniently. Pieces that should have gone home instead vanished. So I started looking, started recovering, started storing them until I could figure out the right way to return them. But the more I found, the more complicated it became. Countries that no longer existed, families that were exterminated, museums that were destroyed. What do you do with treasure that has nowhere to go home to? You keep it safe, you wait, you hope the world will heal enough to receive what it lost. That's what this place is for. The cabin is just the beginning. Beneath it, I'll build something permanent, something secure, a vault for memory, a shelter for beauty, a repository for all the things the world tried to destroy but couldn't quite manage to kill. Margaret read entry after entry, watching Bernard's mission take shape. The chamber wasn't built in months or even years. It took him a decade just to excavate the space, working alone by hand, removing rock piece by piece. Another decade to install the systems, the shelving, the climate control, and then the careful, dangerous work of acquisition. He traveled constantly. Europe, Middle East, Asia. Following leads, chasing rumors, sometimes buying items at estate sales, sometimes recovering them from criminals, sometimes simply taking them back by force. He lived on his military pension and the occasional sale of duplicates or pieces he deemed less critical. The journal from 1991 detailed a particularly dangerous recovery in Bosnia during the war. Bernard, then 64 years old, had infiltrated a war zone to recover illuminated manuscripts from a monastery that was about to be bombed. He'd carried them out under artillery fire, one backpack at a time, over 3 nights. The entry ended. 22 manuscripts saved. Priceless, irreplaceable. 3 monks died trying to protect them. I made it out. They didn't. Some days I don't know if that's luck or curse, but the manuscripts are safe now. That has to be enough. Thomas read over her shoulder. He was insane. Brave, but insane. He was committed, Margaret corrected. He saw what we'd lost and couldn't live with losing more. And now he's asking you to take over. Margaret closed the journal, rubbed her eyes. Exhaustion pulled at her, but her mind raced. $245 million in stolen art and artifacts, some with clear ownership, some orphaned by history, all of it hidden in a mountain in Wyoming, all of it now her responsibility. We need to contact someone, she said. We can't do this alone. Bernard did. And it consumed his entire life. Never married, never had children, never had friends as far as I can tell. Just this mission. She looked at Thomas. I won't do that. I won't let this eat me alive. So what do we do? She pulled out Bernard's list of names. At the top was someone called Dr. Elena Martinez, listed as Cultural Heritage Preservation Specialist, United Nations. Beside her name, Bernard had written, trustworthy but naive, believes in the system. Next was Marcus Chen, FBI Art Crimes Division. Bernard's note, smart, incorruptible, but limited by bureaucracy. Third was a name that made Margaret pause. Dr. Richard Ashford, independent historian and authenticator. Bernard's note, brilliant, connected, morally flexible. Dangerous, but might be necessary. We start by understanding what we have, Margaret said. We document everything ourselves, we verify Bernard's records, and then we decide who to trust. They worked through the evening and into the night, moving between the chamber and the cabin, photographing, cataloguing, cross-referencing. The snow kept falling outside, piling deeper, sealing them in. But Margaret barely noticed. She was lost in the work, in the stories each object told. A Roman bronze that had survived the sack of Constantinople in 1204. A Persian manuscript rescued from Baghdad during the 2003 invasion. A Mayan sculpture stolen by Spanish conquistadors in 1521, passed through private collections for 500 years until Bernard tracked it down in a London townhouse. These weren't just valuable, they were witnesses. They'd survived everything humans could throw at them: war, fire, theft, neglect. They deserved better than to be hidden in a mountain forever. But they also deserved better than to be seized by governments or sold to billionaires who'd lock them away again. Near midnight, Thomas found her sitting at Bernard's desk in the chamber, staring at a golden mask. Byzantine, 10th century. The plaque said it had been recovered from a Turkish antiquities dealer in 2009. Original theft unknown, possibly during the Fourth Crusade. Maggie, you need to sleep. I keep thinking about all the people who made these things, she said softly. The hands that shaped this gold, that painted those pictures, that carved that marble. They're all dust now, but what they made survived. And Bernard spent his life making sure it kept surviving. Thomas knelt beside her chair. And now he's asking you to do the same. I'm a retired schoolteacher, Thomas. I don't know anything about authenticating art or negotiating with governments or protecting things from people who kill for them. Maybe that's exactly why he chose you, because you're not in it for the money or the glory. You're in it because you understand what these things mean." She looked at him, at his weathered face, at the love and concern in his eyes. "What if I make the wrong choice?" "Then you make it together," he said. "We've been making choices together for 45 years. This is just one more." They climbed back up to the cabin, sealed the chamber, locked the trapdoor. The cabin was warm now, the fire crackling, the storm howling outside. They should have been terrified, trapped on a mountain with $245 million of stolen treasure beneath their feet. But instead, Margaret felt something else. Purpose. For 2 years, since Thomas's heart started failing and the bills started piling up, she'd felt like she was drowning. Like life was just an endless series of problems she couldn't solve, obstacles she couldn't overcome. But now, standing in this cabin her uncle built, surrounded by the evidence of one man's lifelong mission, she felt like she could breathe again. This mattered. These objects mattered. The stories they told, the cultures they represented, the memories they preserved. This was worth protecting, worth fighting for. She just had to figure out how. The next morning, Margaret found something she'd missed before. Tucked into the back of Bernard's journal from 2023, a loose page. Recent entries, not bound with the rest. Her heart sank as she read. May 3rd. They came today. 3 of them, professional, polite. Said they were from a private foundation interested in acquiring historical items. Asked if I had anything I might want to sell. I told them no. They left their card. Mr. Everett Kane, Acquisitions Specialist. I ran the name. Front for a consortium of wealthy collectors. They buy items off the black market, stolen goods, anything rare enough to be worth the risk. They know, not everything, but something. Maybe they've been watching me for years. Maybe someone talked. Doesn't matter. They're circling now. June 17th. The same 3 returned, more direct this time. Said they had information about my, quote, collection. Said they could make me wealthy beyond measure, or they could make me disappear. Their choice of words, not mine. I told them to leave. They did, but the threat was clear. I need to move the timeline up. Need to get the deed transferred to Margaret before they escalate. These people don't play games. They've killed before. I know that from my research. Artifact hunters, tomb raiders, black market dealers, all working for clients who'll pay anything to own what can't be owned. September 15th. Contacted Holloway. Finalized everything. Margaret gets the property when I'm gone. Hopefully they'll think the collection died with me. Hopefully she'll have time to decide what to do before they figure out she exists. But if they find her, if they come for her, she needs to know. The cabin is defensible. I built it that way. Supplies for months in the cellar, weapons in the hidden panel behind the bookshelf, radio on emergency frequency 7.3, ranger station monitors it. I'm sorry, Margaret. I tried to finish this before involving you. Tried to find a way to return everything safely, but I'm out of time. My heart is giving out. My hands shake. I can't protect this alone anymore. Forgive me. The page trembled in Margaret's hands. Thomas read over her shoulder, his face going pale. Maggie, he said carefully. Someone's been here, at the cabin. She looked up. What? Last night. I couldn't sleep, so I was looking out the window. Thought I saw lights down the mountain. Headlights, maybe. But then they disappeared. I figured I was seeing things. Why didn't you tell me? Because I thought I was imagining it, but now... He gestured to the letter. Now I'm not so sure. Margaret stood, moved to the window. The snow had stopped falling, but everything was buried, 3 feet at least. Nothing could get up that road now. Nothing with wheels, anyway. But snowmobiles could. She turned to Thomas. We need to prepare. If they're coming, if they know about this place. The weapons, Thomas said. Bernard mentioned weapons. They found the hidden panel exactly where Bernard's note indicated. Behind the bookshelf in the study, a section of wall that looked like all the others, but pushed inward when pressed in the right spot. Inside was an arsenal, 2 rifles, hunting style, a shotgun, 3 handguns, ammunition for all of them, and something else, a tactical vest with radio, first aid kit, and what looked like body armor. Thomas, who'd served 2 years in Vietnam before factory work claimed his life, checked each weapon methodically. All cleaned, maintained, ready. Bernard had thought of everything. "I don't want to use these," Margaret said. "Neither do I," Thomas replied. "But if people are willing to kill for what's down in that chamber, we need to be ready to stop them." Margaret looked out at the snow-covered clearing, at the mountains rising around them like walls, at the single narrow road that led up and back down. They were trapped here, isolated, vulnerable. But they were also standing on $245 million worth of history, standing between it and people who saw only value, not meaning. She thought of Bernard, alone here for 47 years, holding the line against thieves and collectors and anyone who'd rather own beauty than share it. And she thought of those children she'd taught, hundreds of them over 34 years, learning to care about Roman coins and Egyptian art, and all the thousands ways human beings had tried to make something lasting. Those children deserved a world where history wasn't hoarded, where beauty wasn't locked away, where memory was preserved for everyone, not just the wealthy. "We hold the line," she said quietly. "Whatever comes, we hold the line." Thomas nodded, checked the rifle's action one more time. Outside, the sun was setting again, painting the snow red and gold, beautiful and cold and infinite. Somewhere in that beauty, danger was coming. Margaret could feel it in her bones, in the way the air seemed to hold its breath. They pulled the curtains, locked the doors, and waited for what the mountain would bring. The sound came at 3:17 in the morning. Margaret knew the exact time because she'd been watching the clock on the mantel, unable to sleep, counting the minutes between Thomas's breaths to make sure his heart kept beating steady. The sound was distant at first, mechanical, wrong for this place of wind and silence. Engines. She moved to the window, careful not to disturb the curtain. Through a gap, she saw them. Lights bobbing up the mountain road, moving slowly but deliberately through snow that should have been impassable. Not trucks, something smaller, more agile. Snowmobiles. 3 of them. "Thomas," she whispered. He was already awake, already moving. He'd heard them too. Together they watched the lights climb closer, serpentining around the switchbacks, headed directly for the cabin. "Could be Rangers," Thomas said, but his voice carried no conviction. "At 3 in the morning? In this weather?" The snowmobiles reached the clearing. Their engines cut simultaneously, plunging the world back into silence. 3 figures dismounted, shapes in heavy winter gear, faces obscured. They moved with precision, spreading out around the cabin perimeter. Not random visitors, not lost hikers, hunters. One of them approached the front door, knocked. 3 measured strikes that echoed through the cabin like gunshots. Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs. Thomas picked up the rifle he'd left leaning against the wall, checked the chamber. They'd agreed they wouldn't answer, wouldn't engage, would simply wait them out. But the knocking came again, harder this time, more insistent. Then a voice, female, carrying clearly through the heavy door. "Mr. Hartley, Bernard Hartley, we know you're in there. We've come a very long way to speak with you. It would be easier if we did this civilly." Margaret and Thomas exchanged glances. They thought Bernard was still alive. They didn't know he'd died, didn't know the property had transferred. That gave them an advantage. Small, but something. "Bernard Hartley died 3 weeks ago," Margaret called through the door, keeping her voice steady. "I'm his niece. This is my property now. You're trespassing." Silence. Then footsteps crunching through snow, circling. Whispered consultation. The voice came again, closer to the door now. "Mrs. Monroe, I presume? My name is Dr. Eleanor Voss. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to make you an offer. A very generous offer for items I believe your uncle was storing on this property." "There's nothing here," Margaret said. "Just an old cabin. If you're looking for valuable antiques, you've wasted your time. Please, Mrs. Monroe, let's not insult each other's intelligence. Your uncle spent 47 years acquiring one of the most significant private collections of recovered cultural artifacts in existence. I've been tracking his activities for over a decade. I know what's here, and I know you've already found it. Margaret's blood ran cold. How did she know that? Had they been watching the cabin? Had they seen them going in and out of the chamber? I don't know what you're talking about, she tried again, but her voice wavered. The trapdoor in the study, Dr. Voss said patiently. Beneath the Persian rug, approximately 3 feet square. Steel door at the bottom of the stairs. 3 locks. Shall I continue, or shall we have an honest conversation? Thomas moved to the door, rifle ready. Margaret grabbed his arm, shook her head. Not yet, not unless they had no other choice. What do you want? Margaret asked. To come inside, to talk, to show you that I'm not your enemy. I have resources you need, Mrs. Monroe. Legal protection, financial backing, expertise in handling items of this nature. Your uncle spent his entire life protecting that collection alone. He died alone, having accomplished nothing except hoarding beauty no one will ever see. You don't have to make the same mistake. He accomplished plenty, Margaret snapped, surprising herself with the heat in her voice. He kept those items safe, kept them from people like you who see only dollar signs. A pause. When Dr. Voss spoke again, her tone had shifted, hardened slightly. People like me. Mrs. Monroe, you know nothing about me, nothing about why I'm here, but you're right about one thing. It's cold out here, very cold. My colleagues and I will make camp. We'll wait. And tomorrow, when you've had time to think clearly, we'll talk again. I think you'll find I'm quite reasonable. Footsteps retreated. Engines roared back to life. But they didn't leave. Instead, they moved to the edge of the clearing, near the tree line. Margaret watched as they began setting up tents, unpacking supplies. They'd come prepared for a long stay. They're not leaving, Thomas said. No, they're settling in. By dawn, Dr. Voss's camp was fully established. 3 heavy-duty tents, a portable generator, enough supplies for weeks. 4 people total now, not 3. The 4th must have been waiting at the tree line. They worked efficiently, professionally, not thugs or random criminals. This was an organized operation. Margaret watched them through binoculars Bernard had left in a closet. The woman who'd spoken through the door was perhaps 55, silver-streaked hair pulled back, expensive outdoor gear. She moved like someone used to being in charge. The others deferred to her, took orders without question. Around noon, one of them approached the cabin again. Not Dr. Voss this time, but a younger man, maybe 35, carrying something. He stopped 20 feet from the door. Mrs. Monroe, he called. My name is David. I'm leaving supplies here. Food, water, medical supplies. Dr. Voss wants you to know we're not here to hurt you. We just want to talk. He set down a duffel bag, raised his hands to show they were empty, backed away. Margaret waited 10 minutes, then opened the door just enough to drag the bag inside. Thomas covered her with the rifle. Inside the bag were exactly what David had promised. Military-grade MREs, water purification tablets, a comprehensive first aid kit, and at the bottom a small leather portfolio. Margaret opened it. Inside were photographs. Not of the cabin or the chamber, but of artifacts. She recognized some of them from Bernard's collection. The Greek amphora, the Byzantine mask, several of the paintings, professional photographs, the kind you'd see in a museum catalogue. Beneath the photos was a business card. Dr. Elena Voss, Ph.D., independent acquisitions consultant, and handwritten on the back. My grandfather's collection was stolen in 1943, 17 paintings. I've spent 30 years searching for them. Your uncle had them. I just want what belongs to my family. Margaret sat heavily at the kitchen table. Thomas read the note over her shoulder. Could be true, he said. Could be a lie designed to manipulate us. Either way, she's not going anywhere. Margaret pulled out Bernard's journals, found the entries about paintings recovered in the 1990s. She cross-referenced the photos in the portfolio against Bernard's descriptions. 12 of the 17 matched. Paintings that had belonged to someone named Voss, originally from Vienna. Bernard's notes were detailed. The Voss collection, acquired by Heinz Voss, 1925 through 1942. Circumstances of acquisition, unclear. Family claimed they were looted by Nazis. My investigation suggests more complicated history. Heinz Voss was arms dealer, sold to both Axis and Allies. Paintings were payment, not inheritance. Original owners, multiple Jewish families, Vienna and Prague. Paintings should be returned to descendants of original owners, not Voss family. Voss family are third-generation thieves claiming to be victims. Margaret felt sick. Dr. Voss believed she was reclaiming her family legacy. She had no idea her grandfather had stolen the paintings himself. "We need to show her this," Margaret said, "or we need to keep quiet and hope she gives up." "Thomas, she's been searching for 30 years. She's not giving up. And if we don't tell her the truth, if we let her keep believing a lie—" She stopped. "That's not who we are. It might keep us alive. Or it might get us killed when she realizes we knew and said nothing." They spent the day fortifying. Thomas checked every window, every door, every possible entry point. Margaret organized supplies, inventoried what they had, food for 6 weeks if they rationed, water from the well, firewood stacked high, generator fuel. They could last a while, but eventually supplies would run thin, and Dr. Voss seemed prepared to wait forever. That afternoon, Margaret made a decision. She wrote a letter carefully documenting what Bernard's journals said about the Voss collection. She included photocopies of the relevant pages. Then she bundled it up and left it outside the front door. An hour later, David collected it. She watched through the binoculars as he delivered it to Dr. Voss. Watched the woman read through the documents. Watched her face change. Even from this distance, Margaret could see the moment the truth landed. Dr. Voss stood motionless for a long time. Then she crumpled the papers in her fist, said something sharp to her companions. One of them, a larger man with a scar across his jaw, started toward the cabin. Voss stopped him with a raised hand. Heated discussion followed. Finally, Voss turned toward the cabin. "Mrs. Munro," she called across the clearing. Her voice had lost its professional polish. Now it was raw, angry. "You expect me to believe this? That my grandfather was the thief? That 3 generations of my family have been searching for stolen goods that were stolen by us?" "I expect you to read the evidence," Margaret called back. Bernard documented everything, every acquisition, every provenance, every chain of ownership. He was meticulous. If he wrote that your grandfather was an arms dealer who accepted stolen art as payment, then that's what happened. Or he was lying, covering up his own theft by slandering a dead man. Why would he do that? He was trying to return everything to rightful owners. Hiding the truth would have defeated his entire purpose. Voss paced, agitated. Margaret could see the war happening behind her eyes, belief against evidence, family loyalty against historical fact. Finally, she stopped. "Then who are the rightful owners?" she demanded. Bernard identified 14 families. Most were killed in the Holocaust. Some have surviving descendants. He had contact information, documentation. It's all in the chamber. Show me. No. Mrs. Munro, if what you're saying is true, if those paintings were stolen from Jewish families, then I want to help return them. But I need to see the proof. I need to verify what Bernard claimed. Margaret hesitated. Thomas touched her arm, shook his head. Don't trust her. But Margaret saw something in Dr. Voss's posture, heard something in her voice. Not deception, devastation. This woman's entire identity had just been shattered. "Tomorrow morning," Margaret said. "You can see the documentation, but only you. alone, and you leave any weapons with your people." Voss nodded slowly. Agreed. That night, Margaret barely slept. She kept thinking about trust, about how easily it could be weaponized, how believing someone could get you killed. But she also thought about Dr. Voss, who'd spent 3 decades searching for her family's legacy, only to discover she'd been chasing a lie. Thomas sat in the study, rifle across his lap, watching the camp through the window. The generator they'd brought hummed softly. Lights glowed in the tents. Once, around 2 in the morning, Margaret heard raised voices, arguing. She couldn't make out words, but the tone was clear. Dissent in the ranks. Dawn came grey and cold. Margaret prepared the chamber, brought up specific documentation about the Voss collection, laid it all out on Bernard's desk. Then she opened the front door. Dr. Voss approached alone as promised. She wore no visible weapons. Her face looked older in daylight, lined with exhaustion and something else. Grief, maybe, or rage. Margaret led her inside, down the stone steps, through the steel door. Voss's breath caught when she saw the chamber. "My God," she whispered, "it's real. All of it." "Every piece," Margaret said, "and every piece documented." She showed Voss the files. The original bills of sale showing Heinz Voss purchasing the paintings from various sources between 1938 and 1942. The records showing those same paintings had been confiscated from Jewish families. The witness statements Bernard had collected, the chain of theft clear and undeniable. Voss read through it all. Her hands shook. Tears slid down her face, though she didn't seem to notice. When she finished, she sat in Bernard's chair and stared at nothing. "My father told me stories," she said finally, "about his father, my grandfather. Said he was a great man, a collector, a patron of the arts. Said the Nazis stole everything, and we'd been trying to get it back ever since." She laughed bitterly. "He was right about one thing. We have been trying to get it back, but it was never ours to begin with." "I'm sorry," Margaret said, and she meant it. "Don't be. You showed me the truth. That's more than my family ever did." Voss looked up. "What happens now? To the paintings? To all of this?" Bernard wanted everything returned to rightful owners when possible. Families, museums, governments, places where people can see them, learn from them, not locked away in private collections. And the items with no clear owners? He had plans for those too. Traveling exhibitions, cultural exchanges, ways to share them with the world. Voss nodded slowly. "That's good. That's right." She stood, walked along the rows of shelving, studying the artifacts with new eyes. He really did spend his whole life protecting these things, didn't he? "Yes." "And now you're supposed to do the same?" "I'm supposed to decide what comes next," Margaret corrected. "Bernard gave me a choice, continue hiding them or start the process of returning them." "Which will you choose?" "I don't know yet." They climbed back up to the cabin. Voss's companions watched warily as she emerged. She waved them off, then turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Monroe, I came here to steal from you. I won't lie about that. I've done things I'm not proud of to track down items from what I thought was my grandfather's collection. But you've shown me something I needed to see, and for that, I'm grateful." She paused. "My team and I will leave in the morning. You have my word." Margaret wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that one honest conversation could change everything. But life had taught her to be cautious. "Thank you," she said carefully. Voss returned to her camp. Margaret watched through the binoculars as she gathered her people, spoke to them intensely. 2 of them looked angry, gestured sharply. The argument escalated. Finally, the scarred man threw up his hands and stalked toward one of the snowmobiles. He didn't head down the mountain. He circled around, out of sight of the cabin. "Thomas," Margaret said quietly, "we have a problem. What happens next will turn this standoff upside down. reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Within an hour, the situation deteriorated. The scarred man returned with another snowmobile. On it was someone new. Margaret recognized the type even from a distance. Corporate, polished, dangerous in a different way than physical violence. He wore an expensive parka and moved like someone used to being obeyed. He spoke with Dr. Voss briefly. She shook her head repeatedly, her body language defensive. The conversation grew heated. Finally, the newcomer turned toward the cabin. "Mrs. Monroe," he called. His voice carried an accent Margaret couldn't place. European, maybe. "My name is Anton Krieger. I represent certain interests who've been monitoring this property. Dr. Voss has shared some interesting information about what lies beneath your cabin. I'm here to make you an offer." "We're not interested," Margaret called back. "You haven't heard the offer. $5 million. Cash. Unmarked, untraceable. In exchange for full access to the chamber and everything in it. You take the money, disappear, live comfortably. We take the items to people who will appreciate them properly." "By appreciate, you mean own privately?" Krieger smiled. "Is that so wrong? These pieces have been hidden for decades. Your uncle accomplished nothing but keeping beauty from the world. At least our clients will preserve them, care for them. In private vaults where no one can see them. In places of honor, protected from governments and bureaucrats who'd lock them away in museum basements." Margaret felt rage building in her chest. "Get off my property!" Krieger's smile didn't waver. "I'm afraid it's not that simple. You see, Dr. Voss and her team were working for me. Well, for my consortium. We've been funding her search for years. She just didn't know it. And now that we've confirmed the collection's existence, we're not leaving without it." Dr. Voss spun toward him. "You said you were helping me find my family's paintings. You said—" "I said what you needed to hear," Krieger cut her off. "Your obsession made you useful. Now you've served your purpose." He gestured to the scarred man. "Retrieve the items. All of them." "No," Voss said sharply. "This isn't what we agreed to. Mrs. Monroe is right. These pieces should be returned to their rightful owners." "Dr. Voss, you've become a liability. Richard, would you please escort the good doctor to her tent?" The scarred man moved toward Voss. She backed away, but two others from Krieger's snowmobile closed in. They weren't violent, just firm, guiding her away despite her protests. Thomas appeared beside Margaret, rifle in hand. "We need to seal the chamber, now." They ran to the study, pulled back the rug, opened the trapdoor. Margaret descended first, Thomas covering from above. At the steel door, she used all 3 keys, reversed the sequence, engaged the emergency lockdown. The door hissed, multiple bolts sliding into place. A red light began blinking. Sealed. Back upstairs, they secured the trapdoor. But Margaret knew it wouldn't stop someone determined. They could drill through, blast through, dig around. The only question was time. "We need help," she said. "We need to contact someone." "Who?" "We're miles from anywhere. No cell service, no landline." Margaret remembered Bernard's note. Radio on emergency frequency 7.3. Ranger station monitors it. They found the radio in a locked cabinet, military-grade equipment that looked maintained. Margaret powered it up, prayed it worked. Static filled the room. She adjusted the frequency dial carefully. 7.3 megahertz. "This is Margaret Monroe at the Hartley property, Teton Wilderness," she said into the microphone. "We have trespassers attempting to break into our home, requesting immediate assistance. Repeat, requesting immediate assistance." Static. Then faint but clear. "This is Ranger Station 12. We read you, Mrs. Monroe. But ma'am, the weather has us grounded. Helicopter can't fly. Ground vehicles can't reach you for at least 3 days. Can you hold out?" Margaret looked at Thomas. at the windows where Krieger's people were setting up equipment, at the study floor where $245 million in artifacts waited beneath their feet. "We'll try," she said. "Mom, I'm calling the FBI field office. If there are valuable items on that property, they'll want to know. Sit tight. Help is coming." The radio clicked off. Margaret and Thomas looked at each other. 3 days, he said. "We won't last 3 days, not if they decide to get serious." Outside, Krieger's people had brought up larger equipment, drilling tools, cutting torches. They weren't going to wait. They were going through the cabin walls if necessary. Thomas checked the weapons again. "We can't fight them all. There's at least 7 of them now." "Then we don't fight. We delay. We make it as difficult as possible until help arrives." They spent the next hour booby-trapping the cabin. Nothing lethal, Margaret insisted, but difficult. They moved furniture to block doors, strung wire across dark hallways, loosened floorboards over the trapdoor, small obstacles that would slow anyone down. Around noon, Krieger tried negotiation again. "Mrs. Monroe, be reasonable. You're outnumbered, isolated, and running out of time. I'm raising the offer. $10 million. Enough to live like royalty for the rest of your lives." "My uncle spent 47 years protecting those items," Margaret called back. "I'm not selling them to someone who'll lock them away." "Your uncle wasted his life, died alone, achieved nothing. Is that what you want?" "He achieved plenty. He kept them safe, kept them from people like you." Krieger's patience was wearing thin. "You have until sunset. Then we're coming in. I'd prefer to do this without violence, but I will if necessary." Thomas squeezed Margaret's hand. "We're going to die here, aren't we?" "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe we hold long enough for help to arrive. Either way, we're not letting them take it." "Maggie, it's just stuff, objects, not worth dying for." "It's not stuff, it's memory. It's proof that beauty survives even when everything else burns. And yes, Thomas, it is worth protecting. Bernard knew that. Now we know it too." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, we hold the line." Sunset came at 4:37. Krieger's people gathered their equipment. Dr. Voss had emerged from her tent, shouting at Krieger, trying to stop this. He ignored her. At his signal, 2 men approached the cabin with a battering ram. They hit the reinforced door 3 times before it splintered, burst through into the front room. Thomas fired a warning shot into the ceiling. They ducked, retreated, regrouped. "Next one won't be a warning," Thomas called. "You can't stop all of us," Krieger replied. "Come out peacefully and no one gets hurt." "No," Margaret said simply. They came through the windows next, smashing glass, climbing through. Margaret and Thomas retreated to the study, barricaded the door. Heard them searching the cabin, cursing at the obstacles, the traps, the deliberate disorganization of items. Someone started drilling through the study door. The bit came through, widening the hole. A hand reached in, trying to unlock it from the inside. Thomas fired again, close enough to make the hand jerk back. "They're going to kill us," Thomas said. His face was pale, his breathing labored. The stress was triggering his arrhythmia. Margaret pulled out his medication, made him take it. "Just a little longer. Help is coming." "How do you know?" "Because I have to believe it." The drilling continued. 10 minutes later, the door burst open. 3 men rushed in. Thomas fired, hitting one in the leg. The man went down screaming. The others retreated. "You shot him!" Krieger yelled. "That changes everything, Mrs. Monroe. Now it's personal." "It was always personal," Margaret shouted back. "These artifacts have families, descendants, museums that have been searching for them. You want to steal from everyone who has a rightful claim, just so some billionaire can have bragging rights." "I want what I'm owed," Krieger snarled. "I've invested years and millions tracking this collection. I'm not walking away empty-handed." "Then you'll die disappointed." The next assault was coordinated. They came through multiple entry points, overwhelming Margaret and Thomas's ability to defend. Within minutes, Krieger stood in the study, gun pointed at Margaret's head. "Move the rug," he ordered. "Open the trapdoor." Margaret didn't move. Thomas started to stand, rifle rising. Krieger's man clubbed him across the head. Thomas crumpled. "Thomas!" Margaret dropped to her knees beside him. Blood ran from a gash on his temple. His eyes were closed. She couldn't tell if he was breathing. "The trapdoor," Krieger repeated. "Or the next one kills him." Margaret's hands shook as she rolled back the rug, lifted the iron ring. The trapdoor opened with a creak. Krieger shone his flashlight down. "The keys, where are they?" "Even if you get through the door, it's locked down," Margaret said. "Emergency protocol. It won't open for 72 hours. Krieger smiled coldly. "We'll see about that. Bring the plasma torch. We're cutting through." They hauled equipment down the stairs. Margaret stayed with Thomas, pressing her scarf to his bleeding head. His eyes fluttered open. "Maggie," he whispered, "I'm sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for. I couldn't protect you." "You protected me for 45 years. That's enough." Below, the torch roared to life. Sparks flew as they attacked the steel door. The metal was thick, reinforced, but eventually everything breaks. Margaret could hear Krieger laughing, victorious. And then she heard something else, something distant but growing louder. Engines. Multiple engines. Not snowmobiles. Something bigger. Through the shattered window she saw lights. Vehicles, military-grade, crashing through the snow, and helicopters overhead, spotlights sweeping the clearing. "FBI!" a voice boomed through a megaphone. "Everyone on the ground, now!" Krieger came running up from the chamber, cursing. His people scattered, trying to reach the snowmobiles. They didn't make it. Agents in tactical gear swarmed the property, weapons drawn, voices sharp with authority. Margaret held Thomas, watched it all happen like a dream. Dr. Voss emerged from her tent, hands raised, cooperating immediately. Krieger tried to run. They tackled him into the snow. A woman in FBI gear approached the cabin, weapon lowered. "Mrs. Monroe? I'm Special Agent Diana Reyes. We got a call from Ranger Station 12 about a situation. Looks like we got here just in time." Margaret laughed, actually laughed. It came out half sob, half hysteria. "You could say that." They airlifted Thomas first, his head injury requiring immediate attention. Margaret refused to leave until she'd shown Agent Reyes the chamber, explained everything. The agent's eyes widened as she saw the scope of what Bernard had protected. "Ma'am," she said softly, "this is the biggest cultural heritage recovery in Bureau history. You've been sitting on every museum's wish list for the past 50 years. "It was my uncle's life work," Margaret said, "and now it's mine, to finish, to do right." More agents arrived, specialists in art crimes, cultural heritage, international recovery. They documented everything, photographed every piece, secured the chamber. Krieger and his people were arrested on charges ranging from attempted theft to assault. Dr. Voss was taken into custody but treated more gently, a complicated case of manipulation and misplaced loyalty. As the sun rose over the mountain, Margaret stood in the clearing, watching organized chaos swirl around her. Bernard's fortress had been breached, but not by thieves, by people who could help, people who understood what these objects meant. Agent Reyes approached, handing her coffee from a thermos. "We'll need your full cooperation, Mrs. Monroe. This will take months to sort out, years probably. Authentication, provenance verification, repatriation negotiations." "I know. I have Bernard's journals, his documentation, everything you need." "And the items themselves. What do you want to have happen to them?" Margaret thought about Bernard, alone here for 47 years, thought about Thomas lying in a hospital bed somewhere, thought about those children she'd taught, learning to care about history. "I want them to go home," she said, "wherever home is. Families, museums, countries, places where people can see them, learn from them, remember what they represent. Even though it means you get nothing, these items are worth—" "I know what they're worth," Margaret interrupted. But Bernard didn't protect them for money. He protected them because memory matters, because beauty matters, because some things are too important to be owned by one person. Agent Reyes smiled. Your uncle chose well. They flew Margaret to the hospital where Thomas was being treated. Concussion, the doctors said. Stitches. But he'd recover. When she entered his room, he was awake, watching news coverage of the raid on a television mounted to the wall. We did it, he said softly. We held the line, Margaret corrected. Think Bernard would be proud? I think he's grateful. Finally, after all these years, he can rest. Thomas reached for her hand. She took it, held it, felt the calluses and the warmth and the 45 years of partnership that had brought them here. Outside the window, snow was falling again. Gentle this time, beautiful. And in a mountain cabin far from here, $245 million worth of history waited to begin its final journey home. 3 weeks after the siege, Margaret sat in a conference room in Washington, D.C. that was too cold and too formal for comfort. Across the table were representatives from 12 different countries, 4 museums, the FBI Art Crimes Division, the State Department, and more lawyers than she could count. Thomas sat beside her, still wearing a bandage on his temple, his hand steady on hers beneath the table. Mrs. Monroe, the lead attorney said, adjusting his glasses, let's be clear about your legal position. You inherited the property. Under current law, that gives you ownership of everything on it, including the contents of the chamber. You could legally sell these items, auction them, keep them. You're choosing not to. We need to understand why. Margaret took a breath. She'd been asked this question 17 times in 17 different ways over the past 3 weeks. Because they're not mine to keep. My uncle spent 47 years protecting them until they could go home. Now they can. That's what matters. A woman from the State Department leaned forward. But you understand what you're giving up? Conservative estimates put the collection's value at $245 million. Even accounting for legal complications and ownership disputes, you'd walk away with tens of millions, enough to live comfortably for several lifetimes. I understand, Margaret said, but my uncle didn't protect them so I could get rich. He protected them so they wouldn't be lost forever. The French representative spoke up, her accent precise. Madame Monroe, 17 pieces in the collection belong to French museums, looted during the war. We have been searching for them since 1946. Your uncle's records indicate he recovered them from various sources over 3 decades. We are prepared to offer you a finder's fee, €5 million. Similar offers came from around the table. The Greek delegation offered $3 million for their artifacts. Egypt offered $4 million. Italy, Spain, Israel, Poland. Everyone wanted to pay her. Everyone wanted to show gratitude. By the time they finished, the total exceeded $18 million. Margaret's head spun. $18 million. For a woman who'd been behind on rent 3 months ago, who'd scrubbed floors to pay for Thomas's heart medication, it was incomprehensible. There's one condition, she said slowly. Any money I receive goes into a trust, the Bernard Hartley Cultural Preservation Trust, and that trust gets used to continue the work, to find other lost items, to help other families recover what was stolen from them, to fund programs that teach people why this matters. The room went quiet. Then the French representative smiled. Madame, you are truly your uncle's heir. The process of authentication and repatriation took 6 months to organize properly. Specialists descended on the cabin, turning Bernard's fortress into a temporary laboratory. Each item was photographed, X-rayed, analyzed. Provenance was verified against Bernard's meticulous records. Ownership chains were traced back through decades, sometimes centuries. Margaret and Thomas stayed in a hotel in Pinewood during this period, funded by the FBI. Every morning, Margaret drove up the mountain to oversee the work. She'd become, almost by accident, the collection's guardian and spokesperson. Reporters called constantly. Museums begged for interviews, but she kept most of them at arm's length, giving only occasional statements. "This isn't about me," she'd say. "It's about the items finding their way home." Agent Diana Reyes became a frequent visitor, helping coordinate between the various agencies and international delegations. One afternoon, she found Margaret sitting on the cabin's front porch, staring out at the mountains. "How are you holding up?" Diana asked. "Overwhelmed," Margaret admitted. 3 months ago, I was worried about paying rent. Now I'm deciding which priceless artifacts go to which countries." "You're doing remarkably well, better than most people would in your position." "I keep thinking about Bernard, doing all this alone, never telling anyone, never asking for help. How did he bear it?" Diana sat beside her. "Maybe he couldn't. Maybe that's why he left it to you, so you could finish what he started, but not the way he did it, not alone." Margaret nodded slowly. "There's something else, something I've been thinking about. The items with no clear owners, the orphaned pieces. Bernard wanted them shown publicly, but he never figured out how." "What are you thinking?" "A traveling exhibition. We take them to different cities, different countries, let people see them, learn their stories, understand what was lost and what survived." Diana smiled. "I think Bernard would love that." The first item to be officially returned was the Byzantine mask. It went to the National Museum in Athens in a ceremony attended by the Greek Minister of Culture. Margaret and Thomas flew there for the event, their first time leaving the country. Standing in the museum, watching the mask being unveiled to the public for the first time in 70 years, Margaret felt something shift inside her. This was why Bernard had done it, this moment, these faces, people crying, touching the glass case, seeing a piece of their heritage they'd thought was lost forever. An elderly woman approached Margaret afterward, tears streaming down her face. She spoke in Greek, which a translator conveyed. "My grandfather was a curator here before the war. He died trying to protect items like this, knowing they survived, knowing someone cared enough to return them. Thank you, thank you." Margaret hugged her, both women crying. Thomas stood nearby, his own eyes wet. Over the following months, similar ceremonies happened worldwide. 17 paintings went back to France in a ceremony at the Louvre. Egyptian artifacts were returned to Cairo, where they were greeted with a celebration that lasted 3 days. Mayan sculpture went to Guatemala, Roman bronzes to Italy. Each return was documented, celebrated, treated as a homecoming. But not all returns were simple. Some items had multiple claimants. Some belonged to countries that no longer existed or governments that had changed. Those cases required negotiation, mediation, compromise. Dr. Elena Voss became an unexpected ally in this process. After her arrest, she'd cooperated fully with investigators, providing information about the black market networks she'd navigated during her search. In exchange for testimony against Anton Krieger and his consortium, she received immunity. She contacted Margaret 6 months after the siege. They met at a cafe in Pinewood, neutral ground. Voss looked different, older somehow, humbled. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. "I came to steal from you. I brought dangerous people to your door. I nearly got you and your husband killed." "You also stopped them in the end," Margaret pointed out. "You tried to prevent the assault." "Too little, too late. Maybe, but you're helping now. The information you've provided has led to recovering 37 other stolen items. That counts for something." Voss looked down at her coffee. "I spent 30 years chasing a lie. My whole adult life dedicated to recovering paintings that were never mine. And in the process, I hurt people, helped criminals, became what I thought I was fighting against." "So what now?" Margaret asked. "Now I do it right, your trust, the one you're setting up. I want to work for it. Use my knowledge of the black market to help recover items legitimately. I can't undo what I've done, but maybe I can make sure others don't make my mistakes." Margaret studied her, saw genuine remorse, genuine desire to change. "All right, But you work under our supervision, and you prioritize returning items to rightful owners, not to whoever pays the most." Agreed. They shook hands. An unlikely partnership born from confrontation, but one that would prove remarkably effective. By the end of the first year, 83% of Bernard's collection had been returned or was in the process of repatriation. The remaining 17% consisted of items with unclear ownership or those selected for the traveling exhibition Margaret had proposed. The Bernard Hartley Memorial Exhibition opened in Washington, D.C. on the second anniversary of his death. It featured 47 items representing different periods, cultures, and stories. Each piece was accompanied by detailed information about its journey, where it came from, how it was stolen, how Bernard recovered it, and why it mattered. But the exhibition did something else, too. It told Bernard's story. Photographs of him throughout his life, carefully selected from what little existed, copies of his journals, translated and annotated, maps showing his recovery operations across 5 continents and 4 decades. The exhibition wasn't just about the objects, it was about one man's determination to protect beauty from those who would exploit it. Margaret spoke at the opening. She'd never been comfortable with public speaking, despite 3 decades of teaching. But this was important. "My uncle Bernard Hartley died alone in a cabin on a mountain," she began, her voice carrying across the crowded hall. To most people, he was a recluse, a hermit, someone who'd checked out of society. But he hadn't checked out, he'd checked in. He'd devoted his entire adult life to a mission most people would consider impossible: recovering what was lost, protecting what remained, preserving beauty until the world was ready to receive it. She paused, looking at the artifacts around her. These items represent cultures, families, histories. Some are worth millions, some are priceless, but their real value isn't monetary. It's what they tell us about human resilience, about how beauty survives even when everything else burns. My uncle understood that. He spent 47 years making sure these stories survived. Now we get to share them with the world. The exhibition traveled to 23 cities over 3 years: London, Paris, Rome, Cairo, Jerusalem, Tokyo, Mexico City. Everywhere it went, it drew crowds. But more than that, it sparked conversations about cultural heritage, about theft and repatriation, about who has the right to own history. And it inspired others. People started coming forward with information about other hidden collections, other caches of stolen art. Some wanted to return items anonymously. Some wanted help navigating legal complications. Margaret and her small but growing team at the Trust handled each case individually, carefully. Thomas's health improved gradually. The stress of the siege had triggered complications, but proper medical care, which they could now afford, made a significant difference. He joked that nearly dying had given him a reason to live. He became involved in the Trust's work too, using his practical skills to help establish protocols, organize logistics, coordinate shipments. The retired factory worker who'd spent 43 years breathing metal dust found new purpose helping objects that had survived far longer than any human life. One afternoon, nearly 2 years after inheriting the cabin, Margaret received a call from a school in Philadelphia. The principal explained that they'd brought students to see the Hartley exhibition. Now they wanted Margaret to come speak to their history classes. "They want to know how an ordinary person ended up protecting millions of dollars in treasure," the principal said. "They want to know if heroes have to be rich or powerful or famous." Margaret almost said no. She'd given interviews, done press conferences, but speaking to children felt different, more personal, more important. She said yes. Standing in front of 37 eighth graders, Margaret felt transported back to her teaching days. She saw the same mix of boredom and curiosity, skepticism and interest. One girl in the front row was doodling. A boy in the back looked at his phone under the desk. "How many of you think history is boring?" Margaret asked. Half the hands went up. She smiled. I used to teach history, and I'll tell you a secret. History is only boring when we forget it's about people. Real people. People who made choices. People who tried to protect what mattered to them. She told them about Bernard, about the cabin, about opening that trapdoor and finding treasures beyond imagination. But more importantly, she told them why those treasures mattered. She showed them photos of families reunited with stolen heirlooms, museums finally completing collections, cultures reclaiming pieces of their heritage. My uncle wasn't rich, she said, wasn't famous, wasn't powerful. He was just someone who saw something wrong and spent his life trying to make it right. And you know what? That's all it takes. One person, deciding that something matters enough to protect it. The girl in the front row had stopped doodling. The boy in the back had put his phone away. They were listening now, really listening. Could we do something like that? A small voice asked. Margaret looked at a boy, maybe 13, thin and uncertain. Absolutely, Margaret said. Not everyone can protect stolen art, but everyone can protect something. A story in your family, a building in your neighborhood, a tradition that's fading. History doesn't preserve itself. It needs people who care enough to make sure it survives. After class, students crowded around her with questions. What was the coolest thing she'd found? Was she scared during the siege? Did she ever want to keep the money? How did she know what to do? That last question stopped her. How had she known? She hadn't. Not really. She'd just done what felt right, one choice at a time. And somehow, those choices had led her here. A teacher approached as the students filed out. Thank you for coming. You have no idea how much this means. We lose so many kids to the idea that history doesn't matter, that the past is dead. You showed them it's alive, and that they can be part of keeping it that way. Driving back to Pinewood that evening, Margaret thought about those students, about their questions, their engagement, their sudden interest in something they'd considered boring an hour earlier. This was what Bernard's work had really accomplished. Not just saving objects, but preserving the stories those objects told. Stories that could still inspire, still teach, still matter. The cabin underwent significant changes. It remained Margaret and Thomas's primary residence, but the chamber became something else. An archive, a research center, a training facility for people learning to identify stolen cultural property. Bernard's fortress transformed into a hub for the very mission he'd spent his life pursuing. They hired staff, art historians, conservators, investigators. Dr. Voss became chief of recoveries, using her network of contacts to track down items that surfaced on black markets worldwide. They partnered with Interpol, UNESCO, international museums. The work Bernard had done alone was now being done by a team, with resources, with legitimacy. But Margaret made sure to keep Bernard's original vision intact. The focus remained on repatriation, not profit. On returning items to communities, not locking them in vaults. On sharing history, not hoarding it. Funding came from multiple sources. The finder's fees from various governments formed the core endowment, but donations poured in too, from museums grateful for returns, from individuals inspired by the story, from foundations dedicated to cultural preservation. Within 3 years, the trust had an operating budget of $12 million annually. Margaret and Thomas lived modestly despite their newfound financial security. They bought a small house in Pinewood, nothing fancy. They helped Evelyn, Thomas's niece who'd always struggled, pay for college. They donated to causes they believed in. But mostly, they lived simply, because the money had never been the point. One evening, sitting on their porch watching sunset paint the mountains gold and red, Thomas said, "You ever regretted? Not keeping the treasure? Not selling even one piece to make ourselves rich?" Margaret thought about it. About the families she'd met, crying with joy at recovering stolen heirlooms, about the students whose eyes lit up when they understood history wasn't dead, about the countries celebrating the return of their cultural heritage. "No," she said simply, "not for a second." "Me neither," Thomas said. "Though I wouldn't have minded being wrong. Being rich sounds nice." Margaret laughed. "We are rich, just not in money. That's either very wise or very stupid. I haven't decided which. Can't it be both?" They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the light fade. 47 years of marriage, 2 years of adventure neither had expected, and somehow, against all odds, they'd survived. More than survived. They'd found purpose. The 4th anniversary of Bernard's death was marked by a ceremony at the cabin. Representatives from 19 countries attended, along with museum directors, cultural ministers, and academics. A plaque was unveiled near the chamber entrance. Bernard Joseph Hartley, guardian of memory, protector of beauty, believer in the power of one person to make a difference. Margaret spoke briefly. "My uncle never wanted fame or recognition. He wanted these items to go home. And because of his work, because of his dedication, 173 major pieces and thousands of smaller items have been returned to their rightful places. But his legacy isn't just what he saved, it's what he taught us, that history matters, that beauty deserves protection, and that ordinary people can do extraordinary things if they're willing to try." She paused, emotion catching in her throat. "Bernard died alone, but his work lives on through everyone here, through the trust, through the exhibition, through every child who learns that the past isn't dead, it's waiting to be honored. He'd be proud of what we've built, and I hope wherever he is, he finally knows he wasn't alone. He never was." Among the attendees was a young woman, maybe 25, who approached Margaret afterward. "Mrs. Monroe, my name is Sarah Goldstein. My great-grandmother was killed at Auschwitz. Your uncle recovered a painting that belonged to her family, a landscape by a minor Austrian painter, nothing famous. But it was hers. She painted it herself before the war." Margaret remembered the piece. Watercolor, mountains and trees, simple but lovely. Bernard's notes indicated it had been found in a lot of confiscated goods being auctioned in Berlin in 1997. "We got it back 3 months ago," Sarah continued. "It hangs in my grandmother's living room now, and every time she sees it, she cries, because it's proof her mother existed, created something, mattered. That's what your uncle gave us. Not just a painting. Proof that our family story didn't end in that camp." Margaret hugged her, fighting tears. This was why. This moment, this connection across generations, this proof that something survived. As the ceremony ended and guests departed, Margaret walked down to the chamber one last time. It was mostly empty now. The items had gone home. The shelves stood bare, waiting for new recoveries, new stories to protect. But Bernard's desk remained, his journals preserved in archival cases, his map of recoveries framed on the wall. She sat in his chair, imagining him here, alone for decades, keeping watch, never wavering. She understood him now in ways she couldn't have before, understood the weight of responsibility, the isolation of protecting something no one else knew about, the faith required to believe the work mattered even when no one saw it. "We did it," she whispered to the empty chamber. "We finished what you started. Your treasures are home." And in the silence, she felt something, not a presence exactly, more like a release, like the cabin itself exhaled, finally unburdened of the secret it had carried so long. 6 years after inheriting the cabin, Margaret stood in a classroom in Rome. This wasn't her classroom. It belonged to Professor Alessandro Rinaldi, a renowned art historian who'd become a friend through the Trust's work. But he'd invited her to speak to his graduate students about authentication, provenance, and the ethics of repatriation. She showed them Bernard's journals, translated into Italian, showed them his careful documentation, his methodical approach, his unwavering commitment to truth. The students listened, riveted. These were people dedicating their lives to art history. And here was a case study in how one person had made an immeasurable difference. "Your uncle," one student asked in accented English, "did he ever question his mission? Ever doubt he was doing the right thing?" Margaret pulled out a journal entry from 1993. He wrote, "Some days I wonder if this is madness, hiding beauty instead of sharing it, keeping secrets that make me a thief in the eyes of those who don't understand. But then I remember what would happen if I stopped. These items would disappear into private collections, be sold to the highest bidder, lost again, maybe forever. So I keep going. Not because I'm sure I'm right, but because I can't live with being wrong." The classroom was silent. "He doubted," Margaret said softly, "constantly. But he didn't quit. That's the difference between someone who dreams about making a change and someone who actually does it. Persistence despite doubt, action despite fear, showing up day after day, even when no one knows you're there." After the lecture, Professor Rinaldi walked her through the museum where several of Bernard's recovered pieces now resided. "You know," he said, "when historians write about the early 21st century, the Hartley collection will be one of the defining cultural events, comparable to the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb or the Dead Sea Scrolls. One man, working alone, saved more pieces of cultural heritage than most governments managed to protect." "He'd hate being compared to Indiana Jones," Margaret said with a smile. "He was better than Indiana Jones. He was real." Flying home to Wyoming, Margaret thought about legacy, about what people leave behind. Bernard had left objects, yes, but more than that, he'd left a blueprint. He'd shown what was possible when someone cared enough to act. The trust would continue his work, would grow, evolve, adapt. But the core mission would remain: protect what matters, return what was stolen, preserve beauty not for ourselves but for everyone. Thomas met her at the airport, moving slower now but still steady. 8 years since the siege. His heart medication was dialed in, his health stable. They'd been given time, not unlimited, no one gets that. But enough. "How was Rome?" he asked. "Inspiring, exhausting, made me realize how much work there still is." "You can't save everything, Maggie." "I know, but we can save something. That's enough." They drove back to Pinewood through autumn mountains blazing with color. The cabin waited, no longer a secret fortress, but a known landmark. Tours were offered twice a month now, carefully controlled. People wanted to see where Bernard had worked, where the collection had been hidden, wanted to connect with the story. Margaret had been reluctant at first. It felt like exploitation. But then she realized people needed to see it, needed to understand that heroes aren't always soldiers or celebrities. Sometimes they're quiet men in isolated cabins, doing work no one sees, protecting things no one knows about. That evening, Margaret and Thomas sat in the study above the empty chamber. The trapdoor was sealed now, more symbolic than functional. The real work happened in offices, laboratories, conference rooms. But this space remained important. This was where it had started, where Margaret's life had changed, where $245 million in lost history had waited to be found. "Read me something from his journals," Thomas said. "I like hearing Bernard's voice." Margaret picked one at random. Opened to a page from 2012. "Today I turned 75. No one to celebrate with except the artifacts. But they're good company. They don't age, don't judge, they just exist, waiting. I wonder sometimes what will happen to them when I'm gone. Who'll understand what I've been trying to do? Who'll care enough to finish it? I have to believe someone will. Have to believe the work will outlast me. Because if it doesn't, what was the point?" Margaret closed the journal, her voice thick. "He didn't know. He died not knowing we'd finish it." "He knew," Thomas said quietly. "He left it to you. That was faith. That was knowing." I hope so. I hope wherever he is, he sees what we built, sees the items home, sees that his life mattered. He knows, Thomas said. How could he not? Outside, night fell over the mountains. Stars emerged, brilliant and cold and eternal. The cabin sat in its clearing, lights warm against the darkness, and beneath it the chamber stood empty, its purpose fulfilled, its secrets shared. Bernard Hartley had spent 47 years protecting treasures no one knew existed. Margaret Monroe had spent 6 years giving them back to the world. One person's lonely mission had become a global movement. One hidden collection had sparked conversations about cultural heritage that would continue for generations. And 2 ordinary people, a retired teacher and a former factory worker, had proven that you don't need wealth or power or fame to change the world. You just need to see something worth protecting and refuse to walk away. Anyone can change the world if they're stubborn enough to stand their ground and brave enough to speak the truth. As morning light crept across the mountains, Margaret Monroe sat at her desk, not in the cabin, but in the Trust's main office in Pinewood. She was reading through applications from young professionals who wanted to work for the organization. Historians, investigators, conservators, people who'd heard the story and wanted to be part of continuing Bernard's mission. One application stood out. A 23-year-old woman from Poland studying art history, whose grandmother's family had lost everything in the war. She wrote, "I want to help other families find what we couldn't. I want to be someone who makes sure history doesn't disappear just because it's convenient to forget." Margaret circled the application. Yes. Thomas appeared in the doorway with coffee, his daily routine. Another recruit? The best kind. Someone who understands this isn't about money or glory, it's about memory. Like you. Like Bernard, I just happened to be the one he trusted. Thomas kissed the top of her head. He chose well. Through the window, Margaret could see the mountains where Bernard had spent most of his adult life, where he'd built his fortress, hidden his treasures, carried his burden alone. He'd died not knowing if any of it would matter, died not knowing if anyone would understand. But now they did. Now the world knew. Now children in classrooms learned about the quiet man who spent his life protecting beauty. Now families reunited with stolen heirlooms wept with gratitude. Now museums displayed artifacts with plaques reading, "Recovered by Bernard Hartley, returned by the Hartley Trust." His name would be remembered not for what he owned, but for what he protected. Not for what he took, but for what he gave back. And that, Margaret thought, was the best legacy anyone could leave. The elderly couple who'd inherited a snowed-in cabin for $7,500 in back taxes had become guardians of one of the greatest cultural recovery efforts in modern history. They hadn't sought it, hadn't expected it. But when the choice came, when the trapdoor opened and the chamber revealed its secrets, they'd done what Bernard had always hoped someone would do. They'd finished what he started. They'd given the treasures back to the world, and in doing so, they'd reminded everyone that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things if they believed something mattered enough to fight for it. Because in the end, it wasn't about the $245 million. It wasn't about the fame or recognition or reward. It was about proving that beauty survives. That memory matters. That one person, working quietly in the dark, can protect something precious until the world is ready to receive it. Bernard Joseph Hartley had been that person. Margaret Monroe had become that person. And somewhere, in classrooms and museums and living rooms around the world, others were learning that they could be that person too. The work wasn't finished. It would never be finished. There would always be more items to recover, more families to reunite with their heritage, more stories to preserve. But that was okay, because now Bernard's lonely mission had become a shared calling. Now the fortress on the mountain had become a beacon, and 2 people who'd once struggled to pay rent had learned that the richest life wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in moments like this, sitting together, drinking coffee, watching mountains that had witnessed everything and knowing they'd done something that mattered. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the truth deserves a voice and that ordinary people can change the world one choice at a time.